Every morning, millions of Americans wake up, get dressed, and quietly hand over the best hours of their lives, minus in exchange for just enough money to do it again tomorrow. They were told that a steady paycheck was the path to security minus. But nobody warned them that security and wealth are two completely different destinations. Here is the uncomfortable truth that your employer, your school, and your government never wanted you to figure out, minus the job was never designed to make you rich. The modern workplace was built during the Industrial Revolution, when factory owners needed obedient workers who would show up, stay quiet, and trade time for wages. That system was never redesigned, minus it was just rebranded with open plan offices, HR departments, and quarterly performance reviews that make you feel like you're progressing. There is a name for what most working people experience, minus it is called the income ceiling, minus, and it is the invisible limit built into every salary structure in every industry. No matter how hard you work, no matter how many hours you log, your income can only grow as fast as your employer allows minus, and your employer's first priority is never your wealth. Think about this carefully, minus. When you accept a salary, you are essentially agreeing to sell your most valuable asset at a fixed price, regardless of how much value you actually create. Your boss knows exactly what your labor is worth to the company, minus, and the gap between that number and your paycheck is called profit, and it flows directly into someone else's account. The average American worker receives around 30 to 40% of the value they produce, minus the rest is captured by shareholders, executives, and ownership structures they were never invited into. And before that paycheck even reaches your hands, the government takes its cut first, minus because employees are taxed at the highest rates in the entire financial system. Business owners, investors, and asset holders all pay lower effective tax rates than salaried workers, minus this is not an accident. It is a structural feature of how wealth is designed to accumulate. While you are taxed on every dollar you earn before you can spend it, the wealthy are taxed only on gains, minus, and only when they choose to realize them. This single difference in how income is taxed versus how wealth compounds is responsible for more of the wealth gap in America than almost any other factor. Now consider what happens to your money after taxes minus rent, car, payments, groceries, insurance, subscriptions, minus by the end of the month. Most working Americans have almost nothing left to invest. This is not a failure of willpower or financial discipline. Minus, it is the predictable outcome of a system where expenses are designed to rise in perfect proportion to income. Economists call it lifestyle inflation, minus. And it is the silent force that keeps even high-earning professionals trapped on the same treadmill as everyone else. A household earning $80,000 a year often saves less, proportionally, than a household earning $40. Zero minus because income growth without asset ownership is just a bigger cage. The uncomfortable math is this. Minus if you work a job for 40 years, you will trade roughly 80,000 hours of your life for an income that almost certainly stops the moment you stop working. That is not a career, minus, that is a rental agreement on your own time. Minus, and at the end of the lease, you own nothing that was built during those years. The wealthy do not get rich by working harder. Minus, they get rich by building systems that work while they sleep. Systems that generate income, whether they show up or not. This is the fundamental difference between earned income and passive income. Minus, and it is the divide that separates the financially free from the financially dependent. Earned income dies the moment you stop earning it, minus passive income, by contrast, compounds quietly in the background, growing larger with every passing year. Robert Kiyosaki called it the difference between the left side and the right side of the cash flow quadrant, minus employees trade time for money, while owners and investors make money trade for more money. The wealthy figured out something that schools never teach, minus money itself can be an employee, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without benefits, without breaks, and without complaints. A single dollar invested in the right asset at age 25 can become $10, $20, even $50 by retirement. Minus, but a dollar spent on surviving this month is simply gone forever. This is the compounding trap that most working Americans never escape. Minus, they are so focused on surviving the present that they sacrifice the exponential future they can no longer see. And the cruelest part is that the job itself creates the conditions for the trap, minus it consumes your time, exhausts your energy, and leaves you with just enough money to want more of the same. By the time Friday arrives, most workers are not thinking about building wealth. They are thinking about recovering from the week that just destroyed them. Financial exhaustion is not laziness, minus it is the predictable result of a system that extracts maximum output from human beings and returns the minimum required to keep them coming back. Meanwhile, the business owner who signed your paycheck is using your labor to build an asset -1 that can be sold, scaled, inherited, or leveraged for even greater wealth. Your employer is not your partner in prosperity, minus your employer is a buyer of your time. And like any smart buyer, they are always trying to pay the lowest price for the highest return. This is not cynicism, minus it is simply how markets work, minus and the first step to escaping the system is understanding exactly which role you are currently playing inside it. Most people spend their entire careers in the role of the worker, waiting for a raise, waiting for a promotion, waiting for someone above them to finally recognize their value and reward it. But raises are designed to give you just enough to prevent you from leaving, minus they are a retention tool, not a wealth-building mechanism, and they will never outpace inflation on their own. The average American salary increase is between 3 and 4% per year, minus while real asset appreciation, real estate returns, and equity market gains have historically outpaced that by a significant margin. In plain terms, minus your paycheck grows slowly, while the assets you cannot afford to buy are growing much faster. Minus and every year, that gap widens just a little more. This is why the rich keep getting richer, even during recessions, minus because they own assets that inflate in value, while the dollar in your paycheck quietly loses purchasing power. Inflation is essentially a tax on savings, minus, and working people who keep their wealth in cash or in checking accounts are slowly losing ground every single year without ever making a single mistake. The job gives you money, minus, but the system that surrounds the job is specifically designed to ensure that money never becomes wealth without a deliberate and educated intervention. There is a moment that happens to millions of workers somewhere around their late 30s or early 40s, minus a quiet, terrifying realization that the plan they were handed is not actually working. They have done everything right, minus stayed loyal, worked overtime, earned promotions, minus, and yet the financial freedom they were promised feels just as far away as it did at 22. That moment of realization is not a crisis, minus it is an awakening, minus, and for the people who act on it, it becomes the most important turning point of their financial lives. Because the truth is, it is never too late to stop renting your time and start building something that belongs to you, minus, but every year of delay has a compounding cost that grows harder to recover from. The first thing most awakened workers discover is that they have been measuring wealth incorrectly their entire lives, minus confusing income with net worth and confusing a high salary with financial security. A doctor earning $300 a year with $400 inches student debt, a mortgage, and no investment portfolio is not wealthy, minus they are highly paid and financially fragile at the same time. True wealth is not measured in how much you earn, minus it is measured in how long you could survive and how well you could live. If you never worked another single day in your life, that number minus the distance between your current assets. Your financial independence minus is called your freedom gap, and most working Americans have never once sat down to calculate it. When they finally do calculate it, the number is shocking. Minus not because the goal is impossible, but because they realize how much time has already been spent building someone else's freedom instead of their own. The second discovery is that the vehicle matters far more than the speed. Minus meaning it is not about working harder inside the job. It is about choosing the right financial instruments. Outside of it, the three most powerful wealth-building vehicles available to ordinary Americans are real estate, equity ownership, and tax-advantaged investment accounts, minus, and none of them require a second job or a genius-level IQ. They require something far more valuable and far more rare in the working world, minus they require time, consistency, and the discipline to delay gratification in a culture that is engineered to destroy it. Consider real estate, minus the single most reliable wealth-building tool in American history. Minus where you use a bank's money to control an appreciating asset, while a tenant slowly pays down your debt for you. The wealthy do not just buy homes to live in minus. They buy properties that generate cash flow, appreciate in value, and provide tax deductions that further reduce the bill they owe to the government. A working family that buys one modest rental property in their 30s and holds it for 20 years will often retire with more wealth from that single asset than from 30 years of salary contributions. But the job keeps them too busy to research properties, too exhausted to manage paperwork, and too financially stretched to come up with a down payment. Minus, and that is not a coincidence. The same pattern holds true for equity investing. Minus where owning even a small stake in the productive capacity of American companies has historically turned modest, consistent contributions into life-changing wealth. The stock market has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over the past century. Minus meaning a person who invested $500 a month from age 25 to 65 would retire with well over $1 million. But most workers never start at 25 minus because nobody told them how urgent it was. Minus, and by the time they understand compounding, a decade or more of irreplaceable growth has already slipped away. This is the quiet violence of financial ignorance. Minus, it does not announce itself. It does not leave visible wounds. Minus, it simply steals your future in small, invisible increments until one day the future is gone. By the time most workers reach their 50s, the financial decisions they made minus or failed to make minus in their 30s have already determined the quality of the retirement that is waiting for them. That is not fatalism. Minus, that is mathematics. Minus, and the earlier a person understands the unforgiving arithmetic of compounding time, the more options they will have at every stage of life. But here is where the story gets even more frustrating. Minus, because even the workers who do save, who do invest, who do everything the financial advice industry tells them to do, often still fall short. The 401k was introduced in 1978 as a supplement to pension plans. Minus, but over the following decades, corporations quietly eliminated the pensions and left workers holding a retirement system they were never educated to operate. The average American retirement account balance for workers nearing retirement age sits somewhere between $100, zero, and $200. Zero, minus a number that financial planners will tell you, in hushed tones, is nowhere near enough. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, $200, zero generates roughly $8,000 per year in retirement income. Minus, which means millions of Americans are heading toward a retirement that looks nothing like the one they imagined. And Social Security, minus the safety net that workers were promised, would catch them. Minus is currently projected to face significant funding shortfalls within the next decade, with benefits potentially reduced for future recipients. The retirement crisis in America is not a future problem. Minus, it is an unfolding present reality. Minus, quietly building in the bank accounts and pension statements of tens of millions of working households. Right now, none of this was inevitable. Minus, it was the predictable outcome of a system that privatized the risk of retirement while keeping the profits of labor firmly concentrated at the top. Workers were handed individual responsibility for their financial futures without being given the education, the wages, or the time required to actually fulfill that responsibility successfully. And the financial services industry, minus the mutual funds, the advisors, the insurance products, minus stepped into that gap not to serve the worker, but to extract fees from the anxiety the system created. The average actively managed mutual fund charges fees that silently consume between 1 and 2% of your portfolio annually. Minus a number that sounds small until you realize it can erase hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime of investing. This is the final layer of the trap. Minus, even when workers manage to save, the instruments they are sold are often optimized for the seller's profit rather than the buyer's long-term wealth accumulation. Low-cost index funds, by contrast, have consistently outperformed the majority of actively managed funds over every meaningful time horizon. Minus, yet, they are rarely the first product. Commissioned advisor recommends. The information to build real wealth has always been available. Minus, but it was never placed in front of working people the way that car loans, credit cards, and installment plans were placed in front of them. Because debt is extraordinarily profitable for the institutions that sell it, minus in a workforce carrying consumer debt is a workforce that cannot afford to stop showing up to work every single morning. The average American household carries over $100 inches total debt minus mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit cards, minus, and a significant portion of every paycheck is already spoken for before it even arrives. This debt load is not just a financial burden, minus it is a psychological chain, minus because a person who cannot afford to miss a paycheck cannot afford to take the risks that wealth creation requires. Starting a business, investing in an asset, walking away from a toxic employer. Minus all of these wealth-building moves require a margin of financial safety that debt systematically destroys. The system is not broken, minus it is working exactly as designed, minus keeping workers productive, keeping them dependent, and keeping the gap between those who own and those who labor as wide as possible. But here is what the system did not account for, minus the moment a working person truly understands how the game is structured. They stop playing by rules that were never written in their favor. Awareness is the first act of financial rebellion, minus. And it does not require a trust fund, a prestigious degree, or a connection to someone already standing inside the circle of wealth. It requires a decision, minus a single, quiet, irreversible decision, minus that from this point forward. Every dollar earned will be treated not as income to be spent, but as a soldier to be deployed. The concept is called paying yourself first, minus. And it is perhaps the most powerful and most consistently ignored principle in all of personal finance. Across every income level, before the rent, before the groceries, before the streaming services and the car payment, minus a fixed percentage of every paycheck gets redirected into an asset-building vehicle that the lifestyle cannot touch. It does not matter if that percentage starts at 5% or 10%. Minus what matters is that the habit is established, automated, and protected from the 1,000 daily expenses that will compete for it. Because wealth is not built in dramatic moments of financial genius. Minus it is built in the invisible accumulation of small, consistent, boring decisions compounded relentlessly over years and decades. The second shift that changes everything is moving from a consumer mindset to an ownership mindset. Minus from asking what can I buy to asking what can I own that will buy things for me in the future. Every purchase decision becomes a different question. Minus not just can I afford this, but what is the opportunity cost of this money? And what would this same amount be worth in 10 years if deployed differently? This mental shift does not mean living in deprivation, minus it means developing a fluency with delayed gratification. That the consumer economy spends billions of dollars every year trying to prevent you from acquiring. The third transformation is the most difficult, minus it is the social one, minus because building wealth often requires diverging from the financial behaviors of the people closest to you. When your colleagues are financing new cars, when your neighbors are renovating kitchens they cannot afford, when your social circle measures success by visible consumption, minus choosing the invisible path of asset accumulation feels profoundly lonely. But the people quietly building index fund portfolios, buying rental properties, and living below their means are not suffering. Minus they are simply operating on a different time horizon than everyone around them. They have traded the short-term pleasure of looking wealthy for the long-term reality of actually becoming wealthy. And that trade, made consistently over years, produces a life that most people around them cannot explain. The job is not the enemy. Minus let that be clear. Minus the job can be the launch pad, the source of capital, the foundation from which everything else is built, if it is used intentionally, rather than consumed entirely. The fatal mistake is not having a job. Minus the fatal mistake is believing the job is the destination, rather than understanding it as a temporary vehicle pointed towards something much larger and more permanent. Every paycheck is a choice, minus every tax. Refund is a choice, minus every bonus. Every side income, every financial windfall is a fork in the road between the life you have and the life you are trying to build. The people who get rich do not have different opportunities than you, minus they have a different relationship with those forks in the road. Minus, and they have trained themselves to choose the less comfortable, but more powerful path. Again and again. You were never meant to retire on a salary. Minus, you were meant to use a salary to build the assets that retire you. Minus. And the day you genuinely internalize that difference is the day your financial life begins to change. The clock is running. Minus, the compounding has already started. Minus, the only question left is whether it is working for you or against you, and what you are going to do differently starting today.